Tenants and advocates are upset after one county decided to reopen its eviction court to in person hearings after more than 3 years. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News.
As the snow and travel delays pile up, so do evictions in Hennepin County. Kiana McClellan says she barely made it to court to avoid being one of them.
It took a prayer and a miracle because it was hard to get here.
While most of the Hennepin County Government Center was quiet, housing court on the third floor was bustling. For the first time since the start of the pandemic, all eviction cases, including McClellan's, returned to in-person hearings instead of being held remotely over Zoom.
I would start calling around 6 or 7 o'clock just to see if we had court in person, and then once I actually talked to someone, she was like, yeah, it's still in person.
All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the fact that Hennepin County, Minnesota, where Minneapolis is located, decided to finally reopen its eviction court to in-person hearings. So I thought for sure that all of this nonsense had ended, right? But some places were still, they had these COVID rules in place that said, hey, we don't actually want people in the courthouse, and, we don't want to spread the virus. Well, they finally decided to go back to in-person hearings. And it was kind of bad timing because apparently they have a huge snowstorm going on up there right now. And but they went through with it. Okay, they didn't back down. They didn't say, oh, we're going to push this off till next week. They said, no, we said we're going to go back to in-person hearings now, and we're doing it, right? So tenants and advocates are upset, but not about the snow part. They're really upset because they don't want the eviction courts to be reopened to in-person hearings ever. Okay, they want them to be virtual forever because it makes it a lot easier for tenants to appear at these cases, right? So I disagree with that. I strongly disagree with that. In fact, I believe that a court hearing that is important to a tenant and a landlord requires them to be there present and in person, okay? And if the tenant doesn't believe that it's important enough to be there, in person, then that's on them. It's the same for the landlord, okay? If a landlord is going through a court hearing and doesn't show up, well, what do you think is going to happen? It's not going to go well for them. So yeah, this is one of those situations where I believe that, hey, by allowing the tenants to use this virtual or, online based court, right? What it really did was it made it easier for tenants to be able to show up to court and then, basically stretch out the legal process for longer than it should have been, which means landlords lost more money in rent and they were unable to evict tenants who needed to be out of those properties. So yeah, remember, the grand majority of eviction cases, they are for non-payment of rent. They're not for, these little minor other issues. 90% plus are for non-payment of rent. So there's no fighting them. And the tenants know this. That's why they don't show up to court. It's not because they actually think that they have a chance. They know, hey, I'm going to go to court. I am going to get evicted, so I'm not even going to show up. So we'll just deal with the consequences afterwards. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, okay? What do you think of tenants having the ability to go to eviction court, right, online or through, some kind of software such as, Zoom or something like that, okay? What do you think of that? Do you think that's a good way to do the legal process? I mean, why couldn't we just push all court proceedings by the same token? Why not just push all court proceedings that way? Because I think it takes away the seriousness of the situation. I think it makes people lazy. I think it allows people to easily, just extend the legal process. I think that, it's harder to tell when people are telling the truth through online devices than it is when you're, sitting there right in front of the person and you can see, the expression on their face. You can see their the way they're acting and reacting to the situation much better. So, I think that there is a need for people to be in person. And plus, when you're saying, hey, I'm going to lose my home, don't you think that a person who's going to lose their home, if they think that's something that's super important, which to me it would be super important, that they would show up to court. If I found out, like, for example, in my home, they were going to kick me out of my house where I live right now, the house that I'm recording this video, you think I wouldn't show up to court? That would be very, very important to me, to at least fight my case. But a lot of these tenants, they don't do that because they know there's no case to fight. So anyway, let's get into this article and see what it says. This article is coming from ktsp.com, and it says, housing advocates criticize return to in-person eviction hearings in Hennepin County. Yeah, of course, I'm not surprised housing advocates, they complain about anything and everything that makes, life even slightly more difficult for, good, landlords, okay? So, or slightly easier for good landlords. So anyway, let's get into the article and see what it says. Tenant rights advocates say a planned return to holding eviction hearings in person in Hennepin County could not have come at a worse time. Since the start of the pandemic, housing court hearings in Hennepin County District Court have been held remotely online, but as a snowstorm rolled into Minnesota this week, the court stayed with plans requiring all parties to appear in person at the Hennepin County Government Center. Kayona McClellan of New Hope credited a prayer and a miracle for getting her there. I was catching an Uber and I got kicked out of the app 2 or 3 times, McClellan said. It was a rough ride, but we made it. See, and there's a good example right there. Okay, this lady, she knows that this is important, right? So she's like, hey, regardless of what the weather is, I'm getting my butt down there to the eviction court because I don't want to lose my house, okay? Now, these other tenants who didn't do that, it's on them, okay? It is their responsibility, and, they didn't take it seriously. Many others did not. Out of 55 eviction hearings held on Tuesday, Minnesota Legal Aid says 29 of those cases ended in default because the tenant did not appear. That means the landlord automatically wins and they can get a paper to give the sheriff to come put you out of the property, said Mary Kakzorek, managing attorney at Minnesota Legal Aid. Yeah, and that's actually the way that most of the cases in eviction court end, okay? Most of them end with a default judgment because the tenants don't appear. And as you can see, more than half, 29 out of the 55 cases, more than half of the tenants didn't even show up to court. The nonprofit advocacy group was among those that objected to returning to holding hearings exclusively in person. Kakzorek tells 5 Witness News that Legal Aid had been advocating for a hybrid model that would still allow the option of appearing remotely. We were told that the court is prioritizing moving through the backlog of evictions as quickly as possible, Kakzorek said. When you have people who are used to Zoom court or being able to call in or use their computer saying, you have to come down to court now, that is a real barrier to people being able to access the justice system. Well, one thing, and I just want to point this out, this applies to the landlords as well, okay? The landlords with the Zoom system or the online internet-based system were able to access the courts, just as easily as the tenants. Now, they or their lawyer has to show up to court too, okay? So this is a even playing field. So stop acting like only the tenants have to deal with this burden, okay? The landlords have to deal with this too, and therefore it is a fair system. Hennepin County District Court administrators did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Wednesday about the decision to move forward with the planned switch back to in-person hearings. Data from the Minnesota Court Administrator's Office shows the vast majority of eviction hearings in Minnesota continue to be held online rather than in person. By appearing in court on Wednesday to challenge her eviction, McClellan was able to work out a payment plan with her landlord. It's hard because I've got to either pay rent or feed my kids, McClellan said, and if she had not been able to make it to court, I would be put out, McClellan said. I would be homeless. See, yeah, so she showed up to court. She was able to work out a payment plan, and that is a good thing, okay? She didn't have to lose her home. The landlord ends up getting paid, hopefully. Hopefully the landlord ends up getting paid, right? But for a lot of tenants, they know, hey, even if I go to court and, I try to arrange a payment plan, I won't be able to pay the landlord the money that I owe them. So I'm not going to even waste my time trying to set up a payment plan, So, and the funny thing here is it says that the majority of courts in Minnesota the majority of eviction hearings in Minnesota continue to be held online. So, that makes me wonder, is it just super duper common up there for them to have eviction hearings online right now? I thought the majority of the country had already gone back to in-person hearings, but maybe I'm wrong, okay? Maybe there's still a lot of places where people are able to go online and do eviction court, So anyway, I'm against it. I don't like the idea of them being permanently allowed to just, do this online. It takes away the seriousness of the situation. And, I believe that in a high stakes situation like this, being in person, to fight your case is something that is absolutely necessary.